and welcome to Politics Social live event. Hello to everyone who's made it round to tonight.
Cheer.
Good to see you. Hey! Proof there's people here.
There we go. Proof it's not just us.
All people here. I'm joined tonight by Femi Oluwole, and also Peter Corr of the National Rejoin March, and also Mike Galsworthy of the European Movement. Do you want to introduce yourselves, just in case people don't know who you are?
Sure. I'm Mike Galsworthy of European Movement.
Also, Scientists for EU.
Yeah, so I founded Scientists for EU back in 2015 when the referendum was coming along, and also Healthy in the EU at the time, then March for Change, then European Movement, and here I still am.
Peter.
I'm Peter Corr, founded National Rejoin March in 2021, just before we left the EU, and it was set up because so many people were saying we need to be out there on the streets, like these guys do every week. That I thought it needed to be done, basically. So I set it up, and it absolutely ballooned to what it is now.
Okay, Femi?
I'm Femi Oluwole. I shout at Tories regardless of what colour tie they wear, and I...
Ooh, that was a slight dig. Did you hear that?
Ex-human rights campaigner, current human rights campaigner, and anti-Brexit campaigner.
Cool. Okay, well, we're here tonight because it's the Labour Party conference here in Liverpool this weekend, or this week, and as rejoiners, we were former Remainers, but we can't remain, it's something we're not in anymore. How are you feeling about the new government? Do you think that things are going to change at all, or do you think that this is just going to be more of the same? I'll start with Mike.
I think if we didn't exist, then things would very much largely stay the same, and this government would try to minimise problems and feather the Brexity nest that we're in and settle down into it. But I think that the country at large does not want that, particularly the next generations coming through. And so I think that it's going to take all of our endeavours to represent the public at large and all the different communities of the UK in saying that Brexit is not a sustainable geopolitical place to sit in, and we are ourselves going to have to push the government to get ourselves into a better place for this country, which is full membership of the EU again.
Yay!
Peter, do you think your job in the National Rejoin March is going to be made easier by this new government, or do you think in some ways it might be made harder?
I don't know really. A lot of people tell me it'll be easier because this government will listen. But I know it's really early into it, but they certainly don't seem to be at the moment. For example, banning people like Femi from going in as a journalist into conference. That's what that's what I'd expect Boris Johnson to do. Or
Gammon
Rishi
Box
Sunak
News
to do,
is in the conference. Mm-hmm. Owen Jones is in the conference, and he's not in the Labour Party anymore. He's a Green.
So then I don't
So
understand
there's no consistency there.
And it's never going to go fast enough for me anyway, because I look at it from like people who've got no money right now. They are affected. Whenever there's a big political choice, the poorest are always affected the worst and first and the hardest. So that includes Brexit, and it's that people are hurting out there, and I know we could reverse Brexit or rejoin, and that would help.
Yeah.
If the government uses the extra money we get to help them, obviously.
Okay, Femi, how are you feeling?
I like to use people's own words against them, and I'm currently working on an analysis of Labour, and I can't remember if it was David Lammy or Keir Starmer.
I thought you were going to use my words against me. Oh, God, no.
You're safe. Either one of David Lammy or Keir Starmer said in 2017 that taking the single market and customs union off the table would be a mistake that our children would not forgive.
Yeah.
So the fact that they are taking the single market and customs union off the table right now, their own words speak for themselves. And the question is, who are you trying to impress? Because the Brexit debate died the moment that pretty much all the people behind Brexit admitted the truth. Like, you've got Nigel Farage saying Brexit has failed and that we haven't benefited economically from it. we've got.
He also said that he was going to leave the country if it was a disaster.
Yeah.
He's still here. Maybe he just meant he'll leave to go on holiday.
Yeah, well, he's done that. He's done that a bunch of times, mainly to the States to see his friend. But yeah, it's like several Reform Party candidates said that Brexit is making us poor, and that if Reform was in power, they would make us even poorer still. The Tories have all admitted it. Kemi Badenoch said that Brexit has been especially traumatic for the car industry. Rishi Sunak said that it's the reason why our trade is lagging behind other countries. So if Keir Starmer were to just go on in Parliament and say we're joining the single market, nobody could argue against him because he'd just say, well, no, you've said it's making us poor. There's no excuse for what he's doing right now.
Yeah, true. So, Mike, what's next for the European movement? What's in the next few years? I guess this Parliament, I should say. What's the plan?
Oh, now that we've got a new Parliament, a new 5 years, we can put together a 5-year plan. So European movement is stronger. We've really grown our capacity, and I think there's a whole set of dominoes we can push on, starting with the youth mobility scheme. There is no reason to say no to a youth mobility scheme. The red lines that Keir Starmer set are silly enough as they are. You don't need to go and rule out youth mobility schemes and Erasmus beyond that. So I think that if you target, campaigning-wise, a youth mobility scheme, that then starts opening the debate on reciprocal immigration with Europe for our artists, for our musicians, for our scientists, lawyers, everyone, whereby you clearly get mutual gain on that front. Also, if you have a youth mobility scheme, it sets a framework whereby you can get Erasmus Plus again, because you've taken away the visa barriers, and then it's only the cost barrier left, which you can provide evidence for, and then that knocks on free movement, knocks on single market, customs union on the side makes sense, and you get yourself very quickly into a position whereby you're gathering all the benefits of working together again. You can see the benefits both ways, and it makes sense to just pick up the political inclusivity and collaboration as well and rejoin the EU wholesale. But I think the real push starts with the youth mobility scheme and the whole rationale, philosophy behind that.
Do you think that that's going to go ahead? Because the EU seem to think that it is. They're putting things in motion for that to happen. And what I hear on the jungle drums is that the deal's going to be for mutual recognition of qualifications in return for the mobility scheme.
Keir Starmer's not going to get a free lunch. He's going to have to put more on the table if he wants the 27 members of the European Union to actually spend time re-engaging with the UK.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a case of kind of like, oh yeah, we think he seems a bit nicer than the previous bloke, thereby throwing a whole bunch of free gear on top of that. It's going to be a case...
Oh, I got that then, because he gets free stuff. Sorry, it took me a minute. Anyway, go on.
So it's going to be a case that things got sealed up with the last deal, and if he wants to reopen some of the benefits that were offered before, he is going to have to make some moves that the European Union member states are keen about, the forefront of which is going to be mobility in general, particularly youth mobility. Yeah. So I think is going to have to move on it, and I think is being mealy-mouthed about it now, and I think we should help him out in getting there quicker so that he doesn't suffer for longer. That's why I think we should all campaign heartily right now on youth mobility.
So, Peter, what's the plan with the National Rejoin March going forward? Rough plan, anyway.
I'm a lot more impatient than Mike, and I think things, although I support all of these schemes for Erasmus and musicians and that, and always will, I'm just concentrated on you get all of that stuff when you rejoin the EU. Yeah, and I think, what's the lowest number of years? I think it's 3 years, which Finland took to get in the EU from ascension, was it? And the longest was 13 years.
Well, I mean,
So-
Turkey's still not a member.
I mean, countries that are in the
Oh,
EU,
right, yeah,
how
yeah.
long it took them from
Right.
ascension to getting in.
Mm.
So people that say it's going to be decades and generations, well, it could be 3 years like Finland, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Or 13 like the maximum it took. So the sooner we push the button and
Yeah.
get that rolling, the better.
So I went to a talk yesterday about our relations with the EU, and Stella Creasy MP was there, who I quite respect on a lot of these issues, and she's been a lot more forthright in the past about wanting to rejoin the EU eventually, and she was a Remainer at the time, but she'd missed the idea of rejoining as a fantasy. And I got my back up a little bit, because if you said to someone who was a supporter of Nigel Farage in 2004, we're going to leave the EU, you'd just be like, oh yeah, okay, it would just be a fantasy. Back then it would have been a fantasy, and yet just 10 years later it was becoming a reality, because things change, politics change, the people's attitudes change. And one of the most interesting things that I always go back to when it comes to people caring about the EU, in 2010, in the run-up to the 2010 election, there was opinion polls that went out. What are your 3 most important issues that you care about? Number 1 was the NHS. Number 2 was like education. Number 3 was like pensions. It was the economy. It was all stuff like that. The EU was only in like 1% of the respondents. Nobody cared in 2010, and within 6 years it became the most important thing in all the world ever. So if that's happened once, it can happen again. But I think a lot of that is to do with not just preaching to the converted, preaching to the choir. We've got to make sure that people can see that Brexit's not going very well, to put it mildly. When, as Femi said, even the architects of Brexit are like, oh, it's not turned out so well. But their little get out is it's not been done properly. If only it had been done properly, like communism. If only we did it properly, it would have worked. And you're like, you tried it 72 times in different countries around the world, and it always ended with the same result. So yeah. Anyway, Femi, so are you changing tack at all now that there's a new leadership?
So I'm trying to
of the country.
I'm trying to keep using their own narratives and exposing the problem with what they're saying. Like, they've got this fiscal responsibility bill, which is basically saying we won't do a Liz Truss. Anything that we do has to be consistent with what the Office of Budget Responsibility says is smart to do, and that we would love to spend more money on winter fuel allowance, scrapping the 2-child cap, but unfortunately our priority is to grow the economy, and we have to do that consistent with the OBR. But the OBR is also saying that Brexit is costing 4% of our economy, an equivalent of £100 billion a year to the economy, £40 billion a year in terms of tax revenue. So according to their own fiscal rules that they've come up with in their new laws, they have to start reversing Brexit.
Yeah. But when it comes to changing people's opinion on this and getting through to people, what do you see as like the steps that you would like the government to take, rather than just like the government putting out leaflets to everyone's house saying Brexit is a disaster? What are the things that you would like to see, policies that you would like to see coming from Labour? Not necessarily going as far as rejoin, but just to start those steps to getting people on board.
Well, in terms of getting people on board, what you have to do is just take 2016 out of it. Say, I genuinely do not care about 2016. I only care about the people who are around right now. And the population of the UK, what they need right now is a way out of the cost of living crisis. Yeah. And so if I was Keir Starmer, I'd be going to every small business, every farm, every exporter, every medical charity, every pharmacy, and saying, what are the barriers to you getting having your business function better? Yeah. And when they tell you that Brexit is one of those factors, I, as Keir Starmer, as the Prime Minister, all I care about is helping you guys.
So, an impact assessment, in other words.
That would be
an impact assessment into Brexit. That could be a very good idea. So if anyone sees Emily Thornberry over the next couple of days, have a word. She's in charge of the committee on our relations with Europe going forward, so she's a good person to talk to about that. So yeah, we're going to have a march on Saturday. And are you going to the march?
Oh yes.
Yeah? Mike, are you going to be at the march? Are you going to be?
We'll be there, yes.
Yeah, excellent. Are we all speaking? Are we all?
You are all speaking.
So we're going to be in London, and apparently it's going to stop raining, which is definitely a good thing.
Okay.
God is a rejoiner.
Yeah. And is the plan we're going to do this every year until we rejoin?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, I'm up for that. So next question to Mike. So Keir Starmer has laughed at the idea that we will rejoin the EU within his lifetime. What do you think is a realistic timescale for us to get in? Let's discuss the steps, but
He didn't laugh at it. He said no, and he said
He
no
dismissed it, he dismissed it.
as a knee-jerk response. And this was I'm not going to excuse him at all, but I'm going to make the point that as we go forward, we have to be very careful not to trigger people's muscle memories into knee-jerk responses, because for a lot of people, and I think Keir Starmer is definitely included in here, there was Brexit, the whole period of Brexit 2016 to 2019 was traumatic for them, and they just don't want to go back there in any way, shape or form. Even if it's different and in the future, it's still for them there. And that stressful environment where they couldn't control the dynamic. And so when he was asked that question, ever go back, it doesn't matter in his lifetime, in the lifetime of the UK, in eternity, even if aliens put ray guns to his head. No, it's not happening. No, that's not in the plans. No, robot says no. Sorry. Maybe I shouldn't have gone that far. But the point is...
Didn't you just say we've got to be careful?
The point is this. The future is different from the past, so we do need to use...
Is that your scientific explanation of that?
It's proven.
Okay, good.
So going forward, we do need to think new ways and use new language and different language about where it is that we want to get to. I think it's going to take about 10 years to get back. Don't scowl at me, Peter. I know. Maybe it's less, but
that's within my 3 or 13, so right.
But there's two big elements to this. One is getting the UK population in the right place, and I know we're at 60% rejoin versus 40% stay out. Does need to be higher, but it also needs to be tested in terms of, and what about this and what about that. But also the European Union needs to be ready to redock with UK. We trust you. We think you're good. You're in the right shape to do it. We don't think you're going to play hokey cokey with us down the decades this time. So there's a lot of house tidying to be done in both places in order to make it happen. And so it is going to take a bit longer to get ready to put the Lego bricks together. But I want us to work on it as hard and fast and passionately as we can, because I want the momentum high. I want to, as soon as we can, kill the economic drain and the leech that is stuck on our nation that is Brexit. Get rid of that. Bury Brexit. Bury all the Brexit advocates with it. Celebrate that moment. But also, in our nation's history, we will then have banished that moment that we did Brexit and got stuck down the dark path and gave up. And then we remembered our principles. We remembered, what we did in post-war times. And then and I want the story of this country to be that coming back. And it's going to be hard work, and we're going to have to battle through it, and it's going to take a few years. But I think each and every year that we build back to it, in terms of reasserting our values, is not time wasted. It's time of re-energizing, rebuilding, reasserting, and coming really back to life again. And so I'm looking forward to every single day of it. The pendulum has swung
really
over
exciting.
there, and we're coming. Well,
especially the bit about burying Farage alive. I like that bit. Hang on, we weren't supposed to... That's not what I said.
No, but it is exciting if you think about history, not just of this country, but history of this continent, but more than that, history of world dynamics, because the big powers in the world at the moment are Europe, the States, China, and India coming along. And I think the European model of collaboration, it's not just the size of the market, it's all the values that go with it and taking care of each other. It's the whole model of being human beings and nations interacting. It is absolutely unique in the history of humanity. And if we want to go forward as a species, it's got to be that. So the UK having broken away, then coming back into the EU, and that being the model that African nations are copying at the moment, I think that in the whole historical context of humanity is very significant, and we're at the crux of it. So I do find that very exciting.
Good stuff. Okay. And Peter, so you think that it's going to be quicker than that then? 10 years, is that too long for you?
10 years.
You can't muck about for 10 years.
It is too long for me.
That's £1 trillion.
When you think about what
At least.
I said at the beginning, the thing that really keeps me going is people with nothing right now who need help right now.
Yeah.
And like Femi said, there's something right there we can do to almost overnight improve the economy, because people will invest when they know they'll see what our future is, because we're going to join the EU. They know what the EU is doing. So we'll get investment, plus the mid to long term extra money into the country. Yeah. So 10 years is too long for me, looking at it like that.
If we got everything but being part of the EU, so we were back in Erasmus, we were back in Euratom, we were back in the single market, customs union, pretty much we had freedom of movement, would that be enough? Or do you actually want to go that extra step and be part of it?
When we've done all that right, the amount of money and time and effort it must take to do each step, it's like you do a step, you get it, yeah, we were in Erasmus, so now we start again, so now we're going to start a new campaign for this thing, all the money, effort, etc. Cool, we got that. On and on and on. At what point do you go, why don't we just rejoin the EU?
Well, exactly. That's what I'm hoping that it will be, a set of dominoes, basically. We step by step, we get closer and closer to the EU. And I think I'm a bit more positive, generally, that this Labour government, although its priority is not necessarily rejoining the EU, it is resetting our relationship with Europe after the debacle of having Tories in charge who literally said, don't know whether France is a friend or foe. And you're like, what? These are NATO allies? We fought together in World War I and World War II. And we don't know if they're on our side. I mean, what does a country have to do to prove it's on your side?
There's people on our Twitter yesterday saying we should go to war with France to stop the small boats.
Oh my word. That's why you should never go on Twitter. De-Twitter.
People.
Detox. De-Twitter. Absolutely. We had a question come in from Sfax in the chat, and thank you for the super chats that have come in. That's really kind of you. Sfax has asked, it's a related question, and I'm going to give this to Femi. What's the best way to show people the failures and the cost of Brexit?
I'd say
Go shopping and look at the shelves.
there's that, but I think it is just speaking to the people that are actually directly affected by it, the people that literally can't do the things that they would otherwise do. People like Peter that actually have to deal with the red tape at the border when they're driving the lorries. People in the farmers that aren't able to get the staff that they need. And there was like so many. I think at least 40,000 pigs were slaughtered in 2022 because they didn't have the
vets.
Yeah, exactly.
And you remember when Boris Johnson said, well, we're going to die anyway.
Yeah.
Remember that one?
Well, he had that same approach to COVID.
He did. He literally did.
Man's not wrong.
Oh my God. Anyway. Sorry, continue.
So yeah, and I think we need to focus. Yes,
Femi's not wrong. Not I just wanted to clarify that. It was just processing. And I was like, no, I'm backing up what Femi said. I'm not backing up what Boris Johnson said.
Mike said is correct about how it is more than the economics. It is about that sense of European unity, and especially if you talk about the youth mobility scheme, getting young people more engaged and going across to the European continent will create that sense of a community and that want to be part of that whole community. But also, right now, you aren't going to get people voting on any issue that is other than the cost of living crisis. And so that has to be the focus. I think back in 2016, there was this idea that Remainers were out of touch, that all we cared about was this ideology, this lefty ideology about progressiveness and being friends with the European partners. No, and it was the right that was saying, no, we're the ones that care about the NHS and saving you these millions of pounds. But right now, we know that the cost of living crisis will be helped significantly if we were back in the single market. We know that it would make our food cheaper. We know that it would mean more money in the health service. Our NHS would work better. So bringing it back to those issues and saying, we know that we can make your life better if we were in the single market. We don't care for now about the issues around European integration. What we care about right now is you being able to feed your kids.
Sorry, I was just communicating with I was just sorting out the drinks orders with AB. Anyway, so yeah, we're here. Obviously, the Labour Party conference is happening this week. Do you think there are still some people in Labour that we can get through to on this who aren't just towing the party line? People who, Mike's nodding his head. You just can't mention who they are.
Oh no! I mean, I think there are the vast majority of the Labour Party, almost all of the Labour Party, is inherently pro-European.
Yeah.
The problem is the leadership at the top. Whether it's pro-European or not, it wants to tackle things at the moment that are easier and get into a better place, and they're going to be distracted with their mission and their plans as they've set it out. So it means that at the moment, as a strategy, we shouldn't be trying to bend Keir Starmer's ear or bend Rachel Reeves's ear or anything like that. We should be saying, in Parliament at the moment, you've got 411, isn't it, Labour MPs, plus 72 Lib Dems, and now 4 Greens, still 9 SNP, 4 Plaid. There is a lot of pro-European parliamentarians in the Commons at the moment, many of which we haven't reached out with and engaged with yet. We would be mad to just shout at the media when you've got this whole new parliament full of MPs. The Labour Party can only give government positions to about 100 of their MPs, right? So the rest are there twiddling their thumbs. One of the things that we're doing at the moment is we're building an all-party parliamentary group on Europe so that we can pull together MPs from Labour, Lib Dems, Conservatives, SNP, Plaid Greens, pull them all together to discuss issues of defence, security, cyber security, immigration, climate change, all of the issues that we share together, and all this new cohort of MPs that have come along and flushed out a horde of all the old braying monocled dinosaurs of Brexit and shoved them over that way, and they've all replaced them, and we need to engage with them because ultimately our parliament is our representative democracy and this seat of power. And I think it's very, very important that on the level of our campaigns, but also at the level of local groups all around the country, that we build those relationships and we actually, I don't want to say train up, but work with our representatives in Parliament so that by the end of this Parliament they are fully knowledgeable and empowered on all of the opportunities of Europe to represent us well in that domain as well. And I think that is a really worthwhile ambition to engage at that level.
Yeah. So your focus is talking to those people in elected office, and getting them on side, which they probably are on side anyway, but giving them a little push. With the National Rejoin March, is this more about getting people excited about the idea of getting back into the EU?
Yeah, originally I felt like after we'd left, Boris won, it felt like this whole community was dying and everyone was stopping to talk about it. Groups were collapsing, and people were saying, in our group, were saying we need to get on the streets and get people galvanised again. Yeah. So
and then COVID came along.
COVID did come along, and put everything on hold for a good year and a half. When they announced the end of lockdown, the day after, I put in the first permissions for the first march. So that's how ready we was, waiting to go after COVID.
Yeah.
And it just built and built and built because everyone's at home, got nothing else but to sit online. That was quite a good time to campaign, really, because you knew everyone was there online looking at it. So yeah, definitely is about getting us lot together, making noise and showing that we're still here and not going anywhere.
Okay, and Femi, are you aiming for both? Are you trying to get people on side, but also trying to get politicians on side? Not that politicians are people, but you know what I mean. Some of them aren't.
So like, I listen to what Mike is saying, and my head is like, yeah, you're right. There are lots and lots of newbies in Parliament who will probably have the right values, and therefore, if we talk to them, that would be the way to go. I think it's just, especially given that Labour's just kicked me out several times, I'm in a more burn it down kind of mood. So I think
vengeance. Police will be knocking on your door tonight.
But yes, you are correct. I think we do need to find some way to work constructively. Do the carrot and stick thing, but obviously with the leadership still saying the wrong things when they don't need to, that worries me. And even aside from Brexit specifically, on immigration, every time they're asked a question about asylum seekers, they always go about smash the gangs. Whenever they're asked about immigration, it's always about the safety of our streets, constantly linking immigration to crime, which obviously, given how critical the immigration topic was to Brexit, is not helpful. So the fact that they keep doing these things means I'm going to keep treating the leadership of the Labour Party as the problem. But you're right that we should look for try and find some allies among the wider parliamentary party.
Yeah, I don't think if you go up to them and go, I hate Keir Starmer, now listen to me, that would be the best way to go about it. I think you'd get more of them if he's like, well, we both agree about the fact that Brexit is doing all this damage to the UK.
Are you telling him to do his last month of tweets?
Not necessarily. But we've got drinks. Mike, Peter, do you want a drink?
No,
No?
Mike,
Are you okay?
man.
That's a Femi.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers. That's my...
We're clearly not being controversial enough.
What?
Understood. Subtle.
I love the way I'm in a real ale pub and I'm getting a Corona with the lime in it. Just to wind up Mike. Anyway, so...
It's the worst.
The attitude that a lot of people have now is Brexit's done, it's over, I'm exhausted, I don't want to talk about it anymore, and you know we have to deal with the situation that we've got. What's your sort of best argument against? Let's ask Femi this first. What's your best argument against that kind of like just apathy towards where we sit now?
Yeah. So and this is the thing about being in. We kept being called out of touch back in 2016, 2017, 2019. Right now, if you don't talk about Brexit, if you don't care about Brexit, you're the one who's out of touch. Because there are so many economic pressures on the UK, whether it's the aftermath of COVID, Ukraine, global instability. One of the actual biggest levers that we can pull as a country to actually improve our economy is the single market. Point to another economic policy that has 4% of our economy just sitting on the table waiting for us to grab. So if you actually care about working class people and the NHS crises that we keep going through, Brexit is the issue. So if you're just saying just let it be, you don't care about the country.
Yeah. And it's interesting, a lot of things that we are complaining about at the moment, a big one is the shit in the waters, right? A part of that is because of Brexit. We can't get the chemicals that we need in the sewage works to break it down before we have a flood, and then they say, oh, it's all gone in the rivers, what can we do? And this is, there was a thing about the pesticides that we're using. We're using loads more pesticides than ever before just because of supply chains. Now, I've got a personal issue with a very good friend of ours who suffers from cystic fibrosis, and she can't get her medicine. She can't get her Creon. It's in short supply all over the country. And there are some medicines that are in short supply in Europe generally. There's some issues like there's a particular place in Ukraine that used to supply a lot of pharmaceutical-based stuff that they can't get anymore reliably. But it's one or two medications. Here it's dozens of medications and people can't get hold of it. So with my friend, she has a WhatsApp group, and every week she'll put in if there's a boot store anywhere in the country that has this particular drug that she needs to stay alive. You know, this isn't paracetamol or something because you get a headache. This is life and death stuff. Incredibly stressful that she can't get hold of it. And we have to ring up the boots and say, have you got this particular drug? And if they're like, yeah, could you put it aside while she posts her prescription to us so we can go and pick it up and then send her prescription back to her. And this situation is just ridiculous. And it's amazing how quickly things become normal, you know, normal to us. As if you told someone 20 years ago that we'll be in this situation, we're shitting our rivers and no one can get their prescriptions and we're having all these problems with supply issues and the supermarkets are making the aisles bigger because they're having to take out aisles so it doesn't look so empty because we're having trouble getting fresh fruit in. I see any soft fruit, it's only good for 3 days. You go to Sainsbury's, have a look at the dates, it's like 3 days, it used to be a week at least, and that's because of Brexit. So it's all these little things, and it's not being pointed out enough, as far as we're concerned, that it's the fault of Brexit. It's kind of in the small print at the bottom. There's a huge article today on the BBC website about gig prices, which have gone up over like 300% in the last few years. Why have they gone up? Well, because of Ticketmaster's greed, because bands aren't making money off records anymore, so touring is the only way they can make money, so the prices go up. But a big thing is Brexit. And they mention it in the article, but it's just mentioned with a bunch of other things as well. If you're a musician and you want to tour around Europe now, it's an absolute nightmare because you need carnets, is it? For each different... Do you lorry drive around Europe? Do you take all the stuff?
No, I don't, unfortunately. But I've spoken to people who know about it, especially in music, and people think it's just the, it's just Ed Sheeran, and like, oh, who cares if Ed Sheeran can't tour Europe?
Yeah,
he can tour Europe because he's got loads of money and a management system behind him. It's the up and coming artists who used to be able to do stuff like that and get a name for themselves that can't do it anymore. Also, small venues here can't get cool DJs and artists and stuff from Europe to come anymore because they can't afford what used to barely break even just to get people in the door. It's a loss for them now, and that's on top of all the closures from COVID and everything as well. Because Brexit, it weren't only bad, but it come at possibly the worst possible time as well.
Yeah, because we were reeling
COVID,
from COVID.
Ukraine, just the other side of it.
Yeah.
It's
and
mental
perfect
that we've done
storm,
it.
isn't it?
Yeah.
And in terms of perfect storm, for me, what we're not talking about is how Brexit affected the NHS during COVID.
Yeah.
Because, like, the Nuffield Trust, the charity in the UK, has confirmed that Brexit is damaging the NHS, and has been damaging the NHS since time. And that's on terms of availability of medical staff, availability of drugs, etc., the price of drugs, etc. And back in 2018, you had the British Medical Association, the Royal College of Nurses, the Royal College of Doctors, the Royal College of Midwives, Royal College of Radiologists, pretty much every medical body in the country saying Brexit would damage the NHS. And given that our biggest vulnerability during COVID was lack of NHS staff. We couldn't treat all the people, and that's why we had to then slow down the treatment of other diseases, which created a knock-on in terms of things like cancer, that sort of thing. There's serious lives that were cost because of this. It weakened our NHS at the time where we needed it the most in the last 100 years. And when I remember in January 2020, I went on Jeremy Vine against Mark Francois, and I read out the list of the list of medical bodies that had said this will damage the NHS. It is damaging our NHS. We've already seen lots and lots of medics leave the country because of this. And he said that's an opinion. Every medical body in the country. And he then said, well, look, they say that, I say it won't be that. Let's try it. He said, let's try it in January 2020. January 2020, he said, let's try something which has now been proven to have damaged the NHS.
He got re-elected, didn't he? Woof. Anyway, Veg Pie is asking what time the speeches are on Saturday.
The rally starts at Parliament Square from 3 p.m.
3 p.m. So if you just want to go straight to
No. If you don't do the march, you're not allowed on.
You will be shot on sight.
March at 12 o'clock.
Yeah,
We
12
congregate-
noon, Park Lane,
congregated, and
Hilton
then we
Hotel.
start walking about
Starts
one.
at 1 o'clock,
Yeah, okay.
Parliament Square.
Sounds good.
Do you get stamps at the
Standard.
beginning, and then you get screamed by bouncers in Parliament Square? You ain't got a stamp, you're not coming in.
You will now, yeah.
Yeah. I shouldn't have suggested
I'll
that,
get a
should I?
stamp design.
We've got a couple of questions coming from the chat, and then we'll take it out to the audience for questions. So first of all, Puddinator's asking, as someone who had family relations broken by Brexit with no sign of them being fixed, how would you advise people handle this side of convincing over previous Brexit voters? I'm going to ask that to Mike, because he's the most reasonable of the four of us. Femi would be like, just slap them till they agree with you.
I would say, in general, when it comes to anything about politics, it always comes back to people's sense of fairness. What's reasonable? What's fair for usually people like them and people that they know, which is why personal stories do matter. And online on Twitter, people may brush away personal stories quickly. It's different when you're sat down with them and talking to them about it. So at the end of the day, I think bringing things back to quality of life, everyday life as a fundamental is important. People can sometimes say get frustrated and say, oh, there are workarounds, this and that. But you could say, well, if that was the framework that we're in and it worked, and this is like it is now, and people are being treated badly, that's probably a good starting point with it. And I would say in general, going forward, that if you try to engage in arguments of GDP and trade flows and this and that, it feels ephemeral, it feels up in the clouds, and you can see Brexiteers as well. They say, well, look at our GDP compared to Germany's GDP, from this slice to this slice, and we're growing faster, and therefore Brexit is all good. And it is daft, but because it's all arguments up in the cloud, it doesn't mean anything. But if you take it down to people's businesses and people's lives and people's family relations and what gets in the way, very, very hard to deny. I always found with Brexiteers that when I said, as a scientist in the science community, building the multinational collaborations, there's evidence for this delivers more by yourself, they would always say, yeah, no, collaborations are great, I just didn't like the You can always get that initial agreement when it comes back to day-to-day pragmatics. So I do actually think that when it comes to families' lives, those stories, again and again and again, in a very personable way, are the kind of things that cut through.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, we'll take it to the audience now. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask any of our panel? Anyone want to put a hand up and go on?
You said you went to see Stella Creasy speak
Yeah.
about not rejoining. What was her rationale?
She just the question then.
She's a Labour MP in Labour conference.
Well, from every conceivable metric, Brexit is hard in the country.
Just to
There
go,
must be a rationale.
just for the people who are listening who might not be able to pick that up. So the question was about what was Stella Creasy's rationale for saying we're never going to rejoin. Well, she sort of scoffed at the idea. She said it was a fantasy that we would ever rejoin, and she didn't give a rationale. Because the whole talk, and there was about 8 or 9 different speakers, we were all talking about forging closer relations with the EU.
That's insane.
And so, and she was like, I think in her head, I can't speak for her, but she's got it that we're never going to rejoin, but we can get as close as possible
That
to
has be a
rejoining.
lie.
But because
This is what I
she
don't
doesn't
get.
think that it's, I don't know, but I would imagine that she doesn't think that it's politically feasible. And also, there's a lot of people who go, do we really want to go through all that again? Because the Brexit vote was traumatic. We had friends, families, colleagues, neighbours who fell out over it and still haven't made up to this day. It's a fundamental problem with referendums, is that you give people a lot of power without the responsibility of,
But as
you know.
we've mentioned before, it would be very different now it's been tried and
Yeah.
tested and failed by every conceivable metric. electorate.
Yeah.
It is insane.
Yes,
And
I agree 100%. It is insane.
But these are the people who are running the country. They are running everybody's lives. They are supposed to be working for us, not for themselves.
Yes.
They need a rationale. There needs to be an absolute intellectual rationale, and that is missing.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we need to...
So I've had this lots of times with the Labour Party in terms of why not the single market? Give me an actual intellectual reason why we are better off outside the single market, and they will say, oh, well, a decision was taken on that. Great. And if we were to take a new decision now, what should the decision be, given that time moves forward, as we were saying before?
We've established right scientifically.
And they won't engage. And you can understand that during an election debate, but when they're actually in power and can set the future, they're not willing to engage in it. And this is the problem with the leadership of the Labour Party, because they, as I'm stating the obvious now, but I'm going to state it, they are putting limits on what can be envisioned in the future because they think that it's going to be dangerous for them to allow that kind of vision to happen. So what people can say, that those who are MPs in the Labour Party publicly, is going to be limited by that, because it would cause the Labour Party problems if then the media start grilling them about it, and they don't want to engage in that yet. So this is why I'm saying that the way we get to the obvious place, which is that's full membership, that's where we want to go, ask the public, that's where we want to go, come on, can't we just talk normally about this? That's why the conversation has to happen with us. And then it has to be a snowball building forward until it is too painful for the leadership of this country or any political party to say no, and they have to start saying, well, we will consider that. But that's the direction that the push has to happen, because it's not going to come from the Labour leadership encouraging us all to open this up as an option. And we all kind of understand why and don't understand why at the same time. It's one of those really weird things. But all I would say is this: we know exactly what we want for this country. We know exactly what we want for our future. We can see ourselves as full team members that understand more than we ever did before. We can see the energy in that and the bright future in that. And it's okay, and it's at full liberty that it comes from us, because at the end of the day, this country is a democracy, and our elected representatives are meant to do what the public wants. So we, as the public at large, should get comfortable with that leadership position in terms of what we want, instead of asking our leaders to contemplate a favour on our behalf. We should be the leaders, they should be the enactors, we make the argument, and we convince them that they are at peril as our servants unless they actually go with what we're demanding as a country at large.
Question there.
I think you're being really unfair on Starmer. He knew before the election that the biggest mountain to climb for Labour to get back into power, because of the gerrymandering of Johnson, that idiot, and others in the Tory party switching around the constituent numbers and so on. So Starmer knew that he had to get the biggest vote for Labour ever, actually, to get into power. And that's why he trimmed his sails on all of these things like Brexit and other things. What I hope is that he, given at least 6 months, he can't suddenly row back on what he was saying before the election so quickly, but let's keep the pressure on over the coming months. Maybe next year, the year after, they'll start to think, well, we can do something now about this. And the other thing is PR, of course, but that's another issue.
So would you like to set a deadline then? Is your deadline 3 months, 6 months, 9 months,
Well,
1 year?
It's almost
What's the
irrelevant
deadline?
what the deadline is. I mean, we just give him. He's only been in a matter of weeks. For God's sake.
Shall we give him
Hang on.
5 years?
Before we go forward,
Well,
people at home can't
well,
hear.
Actually,
Yeah,
that's a fair point.
So the argument is that we're being a bit unfair on Starmer because he had to do what he had to do to get elected, which I agree with. Yeah. Do you think you're being a bit unduly harsh on him?
So yeah, on that particular point, that excuse is gone now. Why? But why?
Because otherwise he'd be accused of lying.
Yeah, but that's going to happen if it happens in 6 months, in 10 months, in 2 years, because he's on record as saying, not in my lifetime. We will not be rejoining the single market in this parliament.
That's not in the manifesto.
So those clips will still be there in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, in 4 years' time. And here's the thing: if it's all about politics and how it's going to look, the whole purpose of your propaganda, your messaging, what you say on TV, etc., is so that you can get in power and make a difference to people's lives. If when you're in power with one of the biggest majorities this country has ever seen, and you still refuse to do the things that you know will help people, then you are prioritizing power over people. That's the issue right here.
This is what I've said actually, because they said it. They had to say it before the election. We agree on that, yeah?
I don't, but carry on.
Oh, you don't agree?
I don't either, to be
Well,
honest.
I do agree with that because they have to.
I don't think we need to have that discussion now, though, because we are where we are right now. But carry on.
But give him a few months, for God's sake, and then to see what happens next year.
My problem with that is, if you remember what I was saying before, there are
Sorry,
people.
I can't hear.
There are people.
Deaf in one ear.
There are people right now who don't know how they're going to put electric on their meter tonight, or
Don't
feed,
know
or
what, sorry?
who don't know how they're going to put electric on their meter tonight, or feed their kids tonight.
Yeah.
Those people can be helped by improving our economy, can't they? And I don't know if I've been brainwashed by Femi because I watch him all the time, but it's like, to me, it's like it's got a control panel with loads of buttons on it with improve the economy. So it's got, I'll press that one, 0.0001% improve. That one, 0.0002%. Oh, that one. And he's ignoring that one up the top right that is 5 to 8% improve, which is rejoin the EU. People haven't, not everyone has time to wait like some people in here might like us.
I will say something specific to what you said, and that is 1 week before the general election, we at European Movement UK did polling on people and asked them, if Keir Starmer were to come to power, should he reconsider his red lines if it were to help the UK economy? And the question specified the red lines were free movement, single market, customs union. Majority said yes. Amongst Labour voters, 71% yes. Amongst Conservatives, 50% yes versus 30% no. Even amongst Reform UK, more yes than no. So regardless of what corner Keir Starmer assiduously painted himself into, people went to the voting booths thinking that the economy was more important than his red lines. And when he came into power, his responsibilities changed from winning the general election, which was his primary responsibility, to becoming Prime Minister of our nation and having a responsibility for all of us. And he is responsible for our economy, our businesses, the welfare of our citizens. And if the people who voted him in, and furthermore all the people of the country, think prioritise economy over your silly red lines that you drew up, what should he prioritise? Saving his blushes or actually doing what the nation needs in order to improve our lot?
Misunderstand me, I don't disagree with that. It's just that he's only been in a matter of days, basically.
So then
and
how...
We're expecting to suddenly roll back and all the promises or whatever they had to do to get elected.
Right.
We wouldn't have got elected otherwise if we had a Farage, as we might do the next election, the way things are.
Again, that excuse is gone.
Putting aside the premise of your argument, I come back to the question, how long? How long is he
you choose the
allowed...
time, I don't mind.
No, but we say now. So if you want it to be longer,
Just before the general election, Starmer said, "I will put the country before party." I've not seen any of that yet.
Well, like I say, it's only a matter of weeks, for goodness sake.
Gentlemen,
Well, he said a week later, he said, not in my life.
can we move on? Because we're not mic'd up at the back. Thank you. Gentleman at the back there with the white t-shirt on.
Hi there, thanks very much. I wasn't going to make this up, just in relation to what we were just discussing immediately just then. I would say, we talk about the size of Starmer's majority, however, it's an extremely soft majority with Reform sitting in second place behind them.
That is true, yes.
So the questions to do with...
You open up just the issue of the economy, you open up sovereignty, you open up the whole can of worms, which is home turf for them, less comfortable turf for Labour. It's a can of worms, and I really don't think there is actually the enthusiasm to have the whole conversation quite now, just now, immediately. It's going to be a long-term thing, and I would just make that point in relation to what we've just been discussing.
Okay, just before we come to the question, just because we need to repeat this for the mic, but essentially what you're saying is that the Labour majority is it's wide, but it's not very deep. And
yeah, still at risk.
Going on about Brexit, obviously that feeds the reform machine, and here in Liverpool, reform came second. That is terrifying. In this city.
I think it opens the risk of being one term.
Yeah. Yes, and it opens up the chance of this being a one-term government. So did you have a question at the end of it?
To my point, which is, how would do you have any insights on how to learn from the mistakes of the past?
Oh, that's a good question.
In terms of, I'm thinking how the abysmal campaign leave. I would say Remain, sorry, the abysmal campaign they fought, as opposed to the excellent campaign Leave actually went with. You can say what you like about Cummings, but that is a fact. They were on it, and was also how do they plan to address the main problem in my eyes, which was the huge charisma deficit.
Are you saying we're not charismatic? Excuse me.
Because Remain went into battle with nobody to make the case, and they went into battle against Farage, Johnson, Gove, and every other.
Okay, just to repeat for the people watching at home.
How do we plan to learn from those mistakes and move forward?
Yeah. Well, how do we plan to learn from the mistakes that the Remain movement made in the past and move forward? Mike, can you answer this because you're going to have to get off soon because you've got a train to catch.
I was just looking at this time ticking away and getting.
do you want to answer this
nervous,
and then you can bug them off?
Big questions are coming along, but I would say, as the question before and the question now. This is all really good stuff for debate, and this is the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night. So not being dismissive at all, absolutely love these questions. In 2016, the Remain side was green, it was naive, it had no veterans, it had no heart, no soul, no political philosophy behind it. It was vapid and the country knew it. Whereas the Leave side had been working hard against the tide for 25 years, right? Yeah. So, it meant more to that, exactly, because I had friends coming to me saying, Mike, it's very nice what you're doing, but there's no way people are really going to vote for Brexit. And I was like, I am online all the time with Scientists Free, and I'm seeing people from the Brexit side up early in the morning saying out, 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 and saying, look at this corruption, look at that. They had all the examples, they had built up their playbooks, everything, and the Remain side was complacent. Trust me when I say, I've been in this for coming up to a decade now. I'm not complacent, I'm a veteran. These guys here are veterans. We have more veterans. We know what we're about now. We know the values and the principles that we are fighting for now. We see the deficit of those values and principles now. That's the difference. That's the difference.
I'm talking more of a national figure, like, and say what you like about him, Blair would have made the case. No,
Femi's about to
explode. Easy now. So, different communities are happy with different figureheads. But I'm not going to miss my train there. I'm going to neck this back. I'm going to have a slash.
Yes. Well, we had David Cameron.
No, stop digging.
Michael, thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, Galsworthy, everybody. Go shove off a little bit there for so we've got time for another few questions.
Yeah, so on reform being clipping at the heels, Yeah, so I, as you can tell for certain reasons, I'm especially nervous about reform. I know what they did with the riots this summer. As far as that
The
goes...
Farage riots.
Exactly. It is the job of... It's about whether you believe in progressive values or not. It's about whether you believe that undoing Brexit is good for the UK or not. We couldn't win that argument in 2016 because we couldn't point to say, oh, this is what Brexit would definitely do because we've seen it actually happen. We have seen it happen now. If you believe genuinely in progressive values, it is your responsibility in government to do those progressive things and show people this is making your life better. If we rejoin the single market, open up the trade barriers that have been created by Brexit, show people their food getting cheaper. These things will actually make that argument. We will win that argument by having the evidence in front of people. That is how you defeat Farage. My fear about Nigel Farage and about the Reform Party is that if we don't do the things that are necessary as soon as possible to drastically improve people's quality of life, then at the next election, people will have lost faith in both the Tories and Labour, and Nigel Farage will walk into Parliament over the crunching bones of the two previous parties.
Gentleman over there.
Hi there.
Next.
Hi. I'd just like to ask, I'd just like to ask, in terms of the pathway towards rejoining within 10 years or up to about 10 years, something like that, what's the sense of feel from a nuanced perspective across the country, bearing in mind we're not very homogenous, before nations were under one umbrella? Are we going to see Scotland seeking independence first and foremost, rejoining that way? Are we going to see reunification on the island of Ireland someday? Who knows? But it feels that different parts of the country, they're already at different stages. It's not all certainly, Westminster-led by any means. Scotland's light years ahead in its thinking, in my view, compared to down south. But it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that. I'd appreciate that.
Okay. So do you want to say the question and the answer? For the people at home.
So how do you deal with the fact that
we're not a very homogeneous nation.
Yeah, the four different nations of the UK are different stages of the Brexit conversation, and the conversations around Brexit are very different. Certainly, if you compare Northern Ireland to England, for example, I think that's almost. As A, unavoidable, and B, something you just have to cater to. The conversation about how you deal, what needs to be done around Brexit is going to be significantly different in Northern Ireland. And I think that's just something we should have learned by now, in the sense of people in England still, I don't think, have enough of an understanding about just how much damage it is doing over there. How much it has inflamed tensions over there. I think that's something we really need to actually start talking about. But I think there are people over there that are having that conversation.
But then should the campaign be championing Scotland, for instance, because Scotland probably has the first chance, most likely and realistic chance of rejoining? I would imagine.
That's a single. Talking about Scotland, if they get independence, they will rejoin the EU. I can't. The way things are in Scotland, and this is, it's not a diss against the SNP. I don't have a problem with the SNP, but I feel like they've imploded in the last few years, and we saw that in the last election.
The SNP may have, but not the notion to want to not be part of the UK. That doesn't seem to be the way at all.
So I think on the topic of Scottish independence, which is a whole different conversation, I think we do need to be honest about the extent to which Scotland has been very much ignored, especially in the last 10 years. Linking it to Brexit, in 2014, David Cameron went to Scotland and said, you have to vote to stay in the UK because otherwise you'll end up having to leave the EU, and then 2 years later essentially drag them out of the EU. And Scotland voted 60% to vote to stay in the EU, which means that Scotland voted twice in the space of 2 years to stay in an EU country, yet left anyway. So I think having an honest conversation about how it is legitimate for there to be a new referendum in Scotland on independence, I believe so. However, I think there needs to be a conversation that is honest about the fact that even if that were to happen, independence, it is better for Scotland if England is still in the single market, because you don't want a border there, because that would damage both economies significantly.
Okay, I just want to go to Bender. Do you want to ask a question?
I've got 4 points.
You got 4 questions?
No, points.
4 candles.
Okay, well, one question. The first one is, we have no control over what's happening in the EU, apart from through our political diplomacy. And the EU is changing. So in terms of Rejoin, we'll know that the far right is rising in the EU countries. What's happened in France, Italy, Hungary, Poland, Germany, EFG. So the question I have is, how do you feel about that? You're talking about rejoining, whether it would be, and don't get me wrong, everybody who knows me here knows my credentials as far as the EU is concerned, and I would love to rejoin tomorrow. But how would you regard the EU, which would have all those far right MEPs there?
So
rejoin. Can I just?
how do we regard the EU rise in far right politics?
I'm talking about the future.
The notion of rejoining in the EU that has.
Can I just say my other thing?
Okay, go on.
Okay. Sorry, I'll turn the mic
Okay.
around.
Yeah. As far as the single market is concerned, as I understand it, and this hasn't changed, in order to be accepted into the single market, you have to be accepted in the 4 pillars. You can't just have one.
Yeah.
So, and Barnier, of course, is back, and he is specific about that. So, as our friend over there said, you know, we have got to progress in those terms. You can't just go for the single market, you've got to go for the other 3 pillars. In terms of Labour Movement for Europe, which I'm a member of, one fact is that we have more MPs who are Labour Movement for Europe members than there are Tory MPs in Parliament now. I mean, that is a fact. Yeah. So, you know, and that's taken a lot of hard work on the Europeans in the Labour movement. And I can't remember my 4th one.
Okay.
So,
All right. So.
Can I really quickly, right?
Yeah.
Because it won't take long. You say the far right are on the rise in the EU. They are here too. So we kind of blend in, don't we? And we all need to work together to get rid of them, don't we? EU-wide.
Yeah, but we're talking about rejoining, you know, an EU, that might be very different.
That's where.
I know it's happening here, but we're talking about that.
Okay, so the question, just for the viewers at home that might not have picked it up, was about the EU has gone, the countries in the EU, a lot of them have gone a lot more far right in the last few years, and what are the consequences of rejoining in the new reality of the EU today?
So there's definitely a noticeable contingent of far right MEPs that are now in the European Parliament, but they're still clearly a minority. And I would say that it is relevant what people were saying about how we have the far right here, because one of the problems I've always had with how we view the EU is that we never look back at ourselves. Often there was the part of the Lexit argument for why we need to leave the EU is because it's not as socialist as the people in that wing of the Labour Party wanted it to be. But we should look at ourselves. Like in 2014, UKIP won in the UK. Like we've consistently sent Conservatives and far right MEPs to represent us on the European stage, and then we complain that the EU wasn't a socialist utopia. Like, we should have some self-awareness on this issue of we have a far-right problem here as well. There might be a far-right problem in the EU as well, but that shouldn't be a reason why we should see ourselves as somehow better than the EU. I think...
No.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's it. They're not asking to rejoin us. We're asking to rejoin them.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We have no power. We're not Wilkins anymore.
Do you not think the EU is a really, really long-term project, though?
Yeah.
So it might be having these problems in the EU now and here now, but maybe there won't be in 5 years or even 10 years. So if we take 3-7 years to rejoin, me being really hopeful, then by the time we're actually getting in the EU, it might be completely different. We don't know, do we, really?
That's going to make it.
Yeah.
And also, one of the things about the far right and the EU is that the far right have very much abandoned the notion of pulling their countries out of the EU. As soon as Marine Le Pen saw what happened with Brexit, she went back on the idea of Frexit and taking France out of the EU. So even the far right has recognised that if you have those trade barriers, it will increase poverty, and they can't be seen to be supporting that because they all claim to be champions of working class people.
Have we got any more questions? Michael, at the back?
All this is based on the EU saying yes.
Yeah.
That's my worry. You've got Hungary, yeah, you could say no. So how do you
So,
it's a great idea, I'd love it to happen. I mean, I'm actually
Okay.
a brother for those people who don't know, I'm hat on. But that's the worry. And it goes on a bit from what the lady said at the beginning. You know, those EU member states have to say yes, and all of them have to say yes.
Yeah.
We
so,
have to apply before they give us an answer, though, don't we?
Yeah, we have to apply. So the question asked by my brother Mike is, will the EU want us back?
Yes.
And people think it's really arrogant of us to say, well, of course they'll want us back. I think they will want us back. Obviously, we're not going to get the same deal that we had before.
Good.
However, going all the way to say, well, we need to do this, we need to do that, and we need to take all these things on that might be fundamentally unpopular in this country, like getting rid of the pound and adopting the euro, something I wouldn't have a problem with. I'm a hard rejoiner. I have no problem with that at all. I'd join Schengen tomorrow. But I know the reality is that people, they like their pound. It's part of what makes them feel British, if you like. But the EU, at the end of the day, doesn't really want an economic rival on its doorstep. It would rather much have us as part of the gang than, the separate thing that's awkward, and we're going to have loads of bespoke deals. Being a Switzerland, essentially. I think Switzerland's got something like 800 odd separate trade deals with the EU, and it's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of hassle. So I'm not saying it'd be easy. I'm not saying they'll all say yes and clap their hands and be dead excited to have us back. But before we go to the EU and say we want to come back, I think it has to be a settled question. And this is where I think I differ a little bit from the other people on the panel. I don't really think that it's up to Labour necessarily to take us back in. I think it's up to us. I think that the people of the United Kingdom need to kick up a fuss enough, and there needs to be enough people to say, yes, we would like to be back in the EU, that the government, whatever government it is, whether it's Labour, whether the Tories get back in, heaven forbid, they can't ignore the fact that so many people are screaming at them, get us back in the EU, this is the way that we recover our economy, etc.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
There is the possibility that the next general election, the Tories will say, vote for us and we'll go back into Europe.
Yes, just the point being made that the Tories might suddenly become rejoiners just to get back into Parliament, which could happen. Quick question here.
Going back to what Mike was saying about the European project and what it's given to the world, and then about the lack of charisma, the lack of narrative that there has been on our side when the other side really did chime into notions of history and all that sort of thing. And then coming to why should they take us back? I have found, arguing eyeball to eyeball with now hundreds of people, that there is one very strong thing that chimes with people who were once Brexit voters and now regret it, but feel despondent, feel that why should they take us back? And there's a very simple answer to that, and it's very mythic, and it goes to the heart of, I'll cast it in the terms our culture understands. The return of the prodigal. There is no greater vindication of the European project than that we left, but then we came back.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I hope that got picked up on the mic. We had a question, and we'll go to the gentleman at the back if you have another question.
Does it not serve the European Union some sort of let's keep Britain out, because then if anybody else tries to leave, look what happens to them.
I think we've proven that.
I think we've proven that.
Yeah.
So the question.
If you keep Britain out, the worse it suffers. Nobody else goes, sorry, I want to leave.
I
think it goes back to the prodigal thing.
Yeah, the question there was. I'll come to you in a second, Peter. The question there was don't they want to keep us out just to prove this is what happens if you go out in the cold? I'm going out for a walk, and maybe sometime.
It's like, stop! He's already dead.
Yeah, I think we've proved that point. But Peter, you wanted to come on that.
Yeah, that's good. It might be good for them to do that as a warning shot to the rest of the EU. But I think better than that would be to say, look, they left and now they've come back. Yeah. That's how rubbish it is to leave.
But the longer you do it, the worse the British economy. Nobody thinks about it.
I mean,
nobody thinks about it.
How much do we let ourselves suffer before before we've proven the point?
Yeah. Richard, yes.
Can I say?
Yeah.
Hi,
yeah.
Richard.
Come on. Do you want to join us? Do you want to come? This is Richard Corbett, ex-MEP. How you doing?
Fine.
Sorry to have arrived late.
No, budge up.
My name is Richard Corr. I was the last Labour leader in the European Parliament, former chair of the European Movement and Labour Movement for Europe. But can I just come back to the issue earlier, how to push Labour? I came in just as you were being very critical of Labour, so my ears were going. And I understand. How to encourage them. So, Labour's being cautious on everything at the moment. Yeah, you can't say boo to a goose, but especially on Europe. But the stated ambition of the Labour government is to regenerate economic growth in Britain, and the biggest constraint on it is the state of public finances. They're going to come up against that, whether they like it or not, because the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, says, you may have covered this before, it's a 4 to 5% hit to GDP because of Brexit. That translates into a £40 billion a year loss to tax revenue. You know, we've all been spending months arguing about, can we afford 2 billion extra here, 3 billion extra there? That's dwarfed by 40 billion every year. Now, you can't snap your fingers and get it back, but you can get a long way to getting it back if you at the very least rejoin or realign with the single market and rejoin the customs union. As long as you're outside of the customs union, you have a customs border, you have checks, you have paperwork, you have verification of the origins of the goods, which it's a nightmare. It's red tape, it's costs, and it's hindering our economy. As long as you're not aligned to single market rules on consumer protection, this and that, you have a regulatory barrier. So that's what will, I think, force them to say, hang on a minute. The other side of the coin is, why be so afraid about it? Look at the underlying trend in public opinion. You know the tracker polls that ask a whole shed load of questions every month to see how attitudes are changing on things. The questions on, was Brexit a mistake? And should we actually rejoin? Would you vote to rejoin? It's over 60%, taking out the don't knows, who say it was a mistake, and nearly 60% saying they'd vote to rejoin. The significant thing is not the level of that opinion poll, it's the trend. It's slow but steady. Most opinion polls are volatile. They go up and down every month with events.
Depending on what the
what's
mail
in the
tells
news.
people to think. Yeah.
This is very steady. It's relentless, creeping up. Why? Two factors. One is demographic. We know the age profile of the referendum voters, and the older you were, the more likely you were to leave. And it's not because you get more Eurosceptic when you get older, believe me. It's it's a cohort factor. So that will continue to change. No doubt about it. The other is people who were not gung-ho Brexiteers, but voted leave because they didn't perhaps know much about it, but they saw the arguments you mentioned, what an excellent campaign the Leave side
NHS,
organised. And they thought, yeah, that sounds good, I'll vote for that. Yeah. And now they're saying, hang on a minute, this bears no resemblance to what was promised. They said it would be easy, save lots of money, all go to the NHS, it would do this, it would do that, we'd have trade agreements with the rest of the world, we'd still have full access to the European market, nothing would, well, come on. Yeah. So those people are changing their mind, especially if they're in a sector that's affected or personally affected. That trend will continue. So as this percentage saying it was a mistake, we need to rethink, we need to vote to go, creeps up 62, 64, 66. Of course it must become easier to say to the government, what on earth are you afraid of? The country wants this. And if a lot of us are encouraging that and making the arguments and making it constructively, we're not going, well, of course, me, Labour, I'm not going to go, you stupid idiots and blah, 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 traitors. No, of course I'm not. They're good people, most of them, and most of the new Parliament, 4/5 of the new Westminster Parliament are people who campaigned and voted to remain. They're not naturally hostile to Europe, but they do need convincing and persuading. So using these arguments, I think, can do it. Sorry, I was a bit long for somebody barging in.
No, Richard, it's great to have you on the panel. It's great. Okay. Fantastic replacement.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Still pains me, the referendum to this day.
Yeah, absolutely.
5 million people whose lives were affected, expats, as we call them, and European Union citizens living here, they couldn't vote, yet it impacted their lives. So I know what you said earlier, Graham, about the great campaign by Leave, But if those 5
I
million
didn't say that.
somebody did.
Somebody did, wasn't it?
Yeah, somebody said it was a great campaign.
Farage.
But there were 5 million people that were denied a vote, whose lives were severely impacted. And to me, to this day, I still believe that referendum was unfair.
So two
Wasn't right.
So two things on that. One, the reason why it was unfair, we can talk about overspending on money, we can talk about disenfranchising people. The core reason why it was unfair was the nature of the question of status quo versus literally anything else. Because the topic of Brexit is fundamentally about international relations, and international relations is based on treaties. Now, we had a treaty, treaties of the European Union beforehand. That was what Remain meant. Leave meant literally anything else. Anything from no deal whatsoever to full single market customs union membership but being out of the EU, which means you've got a whole bunch of different options for people who want to leave to choose from, and there's no way you can guarantee that they all want the same thing. That's why it was unfair. As for which is what the benefit will have in any future conversation, because we'll say, all right, this specific Brexit deal which we have, which the Brexiteers have all spent the last 4 years rubbishing, versus Remain, which will be the treaties of the European Union.
It wasn't just that way it was unfair. I mean, millions of EU citizens who've lived here for decades weren't allowed to vote in that referendum. But if you were from Tuvalu in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and you were here, you could vote in that because you're a Commonwealth citizen. What?
I also want to bring up, on top of it, it was mentioned before that we are timid on the concept of immigration and that Labour is scared of talking about immigration. I think the biggest benefit we've got now in terms of immigration is not just the fact that we've seen the labour shortages and so we've seen how much we are dependent on immigration. I think it's because a huge part of the narrative around immigration prior to Brexit and during Brexit was that immigrants drive down wages by increasing the competition for the lowest paid jobs. What we've got now is we've seen that now that we've got supposedly control of our borders, it's the same people that said that they wanted to give you stronger wages and that you should be able to get better wages for working class people that have spent the last 2-3 years crapping on unions whenever they try and demand better wages. That narrative has been completely destroyed. The right wing has proven they do not care. And so if Labour right now prioritises, and there's some stuff in their King's speech about strengthening unions, ensuring that everybody's paid a decent wage, taxing the rich to make sure that you pull up the wages of working class people, that shows that people who want Remain, progressive people, are on your side. I think that's how you win the argument about immigration. So it's not a case of they come here, they drive down wages. No, statistically they increase the size of the economy, contribute more in tax. That benefit should be shared by everybody. If you make the economy more equal, then immigration will never be seen as a threat.
Yeah, I think we do need to make a positive case for immigration, and that goes with... I see the whole rejoining the EU as a massive holistic process. That it goes along with voting reform, it goes along with press reform, so we get these newspapers under control. How can we have half of our press owned by a guy born 1 million years ago, 1 million miles away, who's never lived here? Do you know what I mean? How does that work? So getting all those things in place. But we've got a question that's come in for you, Richard. We've got a question about CPTPP. Are Labour proceeding with that? And also about Labour being scared of the Tory rags, and that's why they're not being more outspoken on the EU, and I guess also about immigration, a positive case for immigration.
The Pacific Agreement is the first question. That's there. Labour's not going to scrap it, but I heard the Trade Minister today say, let's not forget this is worth 1/64th of what our trade was with Europe. So, wow. On Labour being scared, of course Labour is wary of the opposition in Parliament, but the ecosystem of conservative and far-right media. What is it? 2/3 of the written national press in Britain is in the hands of just 3 people or 3 groups, yeah? And they're all anti-Europe.
Yes.
Yeah? So you've got Lord Rothermere and the Mail
who lives
and all
in
that.
Bermuda.
You've got used to be the Barclay brothers. Who is it now that owns the Telegraph? I don't know.
The Barclay brother. I think one of them died.
Still them, isn't it? And what's his name? It's all Murdoch. Plus the Express as well, on top of that. So that's been one of the problems for years and years. Every time people read something about Europe, it's negative. It's either trying to make the EU look sinister, or silly. You know the old stories about the balmy bureaucrats in Brussels have proposed
Bendy
to
bananas?
standardise the size of condoms across
Yes.
Europe. But,
Yeah, that's
but
right.
the measurements they were proposing was
That
too-
was Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson,
Boris Johnson.
writing for the
Yeah.
Telegraph, writing for the
Yeah.
Telegraph. Yeah. But
Made it up.
the size that they were proposing was too small to cater for British assets. Yeah, so everyone has a good laugh, but drip, 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 over the years it made people think, oh yeah, Europe's silly or stupid or sinister, it's a threat to us. Word on migration. Most migration to Britain, before and even more now, is from outside the EU, which is entirely therefore a matter for British rules. We can be as open or as restrictive as we want, whether you're an EU member or not. It's nothing to do with European regulation. The EU freedom of movement, much smaller numbers, is a reciprocal right and not an unconditional one.
Yes, if you
There's
had
conditions.
if you had no income, you could be deported. No one ever was, but you could be deported back to
You had to either
Germany
have a job or
or
be self-sufficient
Austria.
and show that you're self-sufficient. Britain never enforced those rules.
Yeah.
That's Britain's
But we
fault,
had
nothing
that-
to do with the EU.
we had
Because we needed them, that's why.
Yeah.
we needed the people, and there was no point in sending people back.
Exactly.
Because we have a fertility rate in this country of 1.4. We need 2.1 to maintain the population. And we're getting an older generation that we don't have enough people to look after. We need people coming into this country from other countries. Or, you know, we can make it easier to have kids. Like, at the moment, childcare is so expensive. And
Lowering the price of alcohol.
Lowering the price of alcohol, indeed. We had a question from Ivan. Sorry, Ivan, that there's some questions coming in that I'm going to go through. But Ivan says, thank you, it's a pressing matter of keeping the Tories and the far right out of power. Let's not forget ECHR membership is at stake from the Tories and the far right. The priority is to keep that at bay. What do you feel about that, Femi? Because you're quite...
You keep them, as I said before, you keep them at bay by defeating their narrative. You defeat their narrative by showing that progressive pro-European values will actually improve the cost of living. That's how you defeat them.
Yeah.
Because they keep, I mean, and as I said...
Can we do that without press reform, though? I mean, realistically...
I've always said, you can't have a free market of ideas and a free market of press ownership. You can't have both. If anybody can buy as much of the press market as they like, then that means you can't have a free market of ideas. So I think we need to have actual limits on how much any specific entity can own of our entire press market.
Yeah, especially if they don't live here. Any more questions? We have to wrap up in a moment because we have got a little bit over time. You already asked a question, a very concise question. And did you have another question?
That was it's press reform.
Oh, it was press reform.
Do
Okay.
you think it will
At
take
the back.
a definitive economic event such as a bailout for public opinion to get fully behind?
Okay. The question was, do you think it will take a definitive economic event like a bailout to get people on side, get the public on side?
I think there's a cohort that would literally allow the world to burn down before they actually went back on Brexit. So I think waiting for 80% isn't going to happen other than through the passage of time.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions, or should we? Oh, we've got one more. This is the last one of the night.
The aims of the Labour movement being watered down.
Are you asking, have they been watered down? So the question was, have the aims of the Labour movement for Europe, have they been watered down? Richard, do you want to answer?
Well, its statutes haven't been changed. But look, the leadership of the Labour movement for Europe is in Westminster. Stella Creasy, she's a prominent MP, and as I said, there's lots of MPs. You can imagine they're torn between loyalty to the government and their European beliefs. They want to try and do both, support the government, but edge it closer towards being more ambitious on Europe. They're quite cautious, understandably, at times in what they will say publicly, but I've seen plenty of private conversations the last few days saying, look, come on, let's...
Okay, so thank you everyone. I've just got to quickly thank everyone who gave a super chat. So One Angry Badger a couple of times, Andrew AB who just left, Darian Destar, thank you, Veg Pie, thank you. We got Puninator, we got Pete Farunga, guitar teacher, thank you very much. We got number 3, Ivan, Ambrose again. We got George, Chris C, Bruno Genius in there. We've got Puddinator, we've got Ivan Ambrose again, we've got John C, Chris C, and Ivan finally to say that a super chat wasn't acknowledged. Sorry, Ivan. He gave another super chat to say that. So thank you to everyone here in the audience. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to everyone watching at home. And we hope to see some of you next week at the, well, this week actually, at the National Rejoin March. It's at 12 o'clock. Where are we meeting, Peter?
We're meeting at Park Lane, 12 o'clock, and then the rally will begin at 3 o'clock in Parliament Square. I know lots of people are burnt out, but I really, really need you all to come, because you tell me that we've now got a government who will listen in, so
yeah.
Let's go.
Because we talk about protests. They always don't work.
Yeah.
But they don't work against the Tories. Let's see how they work against Labour. So if you can come along to that, please do. It's great to see you. And until next time, I'll say thank you so much for watching at home and so much for coming tonight. We've got the place till 11, so if you want to hang around and have a few more drinks, you're very welcome to do so. And until next time, I'll say thank you very much for watching. And hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye. Thanks for filling in for Mike. That was really good.
Sorry.
Pleasure.
Yeah.